My audio is good? Yeah? Okay, great.
All right, everyone.
Awesome, yeah.
Thank you, everyone, virtually as well as in person, for joining us at the Brunch with REC. We are in November. The year's pretty much coming to an end, and I'm still so thrilled that we have all of our REC insiders joining us live and virtually to stay educated, to keep informed. And I think it's very important, especially with the current state of the market, obviously with interest rates, but as well just with the way that the market is moving, that we do stay informed. And today's conversation is something that is, I believe, potentially such a pivotal piece of all of insiders and all of our investors' plans for the future that I wanted to speak about it. And we're going to be speaking today, and we're going to be joined by Ronald and Property Pathways. So Ronald, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to be speaking today about the process of adding units to your residential property. So adding 1 to 2 units to your property. And I think that the reason why this is very important to us as investors, especially in prime markets like the Greater Toronto area, the Greater Vancouver area, as well as Montreal, is that once we reach a certain price, and I believe this, once we reach a certain price of average purchase price, around that $1.6, $1.7 million mark, there will be a lagging factor in regards to growth in value. The amount of people who can get a $2 million purchase, regardless of interest rates, is a significantly smaller piece or population compared to ones who can get $1 million or a $1.2 million purchase.
That's right.
So the question for investors when we do reach that point is, what is the right investment at that time? And I believe one of those investments that will work at that time, that's probably about 7 to 8 years, is the ability to change the fundamental asset class of a specific property, i.e. converting a single family home into a duplex, converting a duplex into a fourplex, because you're forcing appreciation. Your values are now not obviously priced at the single family home, you're now priced at a duplex or a triplex, so you're forcing some appreciation. As well, you're able to generate a little bit more income or cash flow from that specific property. And it's going to be very important with us moving forward that we will have to have more of a blended portfolio that doesn't just solely rely on passive appreciation, the growth in value compounded per year, even though that will happen in those right micro markets and those right asset classes. But it's important to have a more well-rounded portfolio now. And that's why I wanted to have Ronald join us.
Amazing.
For everyone, like volume up, for everyone that is watching us and joining us today, the one thing that I would like everyone to leave with is a little bit more understanding of the process of adding units to your property, as well, potentially to see if it might be right for you in the future to take on a job like this. Because just like every advantage to investments, there are obviously things to consider and work that needs to be done. And with this type of investment and this type of process, a lot of the work should be done due diligence-wise before you make a decision to do it, which is why we have a great service provider with our REC Insiders, Property Pathway, and Ronald. So Ronald, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. When I was asked to come and speak, I said, this will be such a great opportunity.
Yeah.
To share my understanding of this process. I got to tell you, I work with a lot of real estate investors daily on different scale of projects, primarily on the smaller scale, between 2 to 10 units. That's where we find it most applicable to real estate investors. And I will say that many real estate investors, even though they have done a few, and from those that haven't done any, this is such a complex process.
Yes.
Right? And it is one that starts from the moment that you're actually looking at properties. So my first advice to anyone, once you engage your realtor, you must start looking not only at zoning, but at least engage someone who has that understanding, because that is paramount. The thing is, you can purchase a property with a big dream of becoming a millionaire, and you're going to convert it, and you're going to have all these people come and live and pay rents, and you're going to be cash flowing. Well, guess what? If it's in the wrong zone, it's not going to work.
Or if you don't have the right contingency fund saved up for unforeseen expectations, because I'm sure
absolutely
there's always things
absolutely
that come up once you open up the walls, right?
Well, that's going to be the part. So that's definitely something that has to be considered as well. Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ronald, and I'm a real estate investor first, right? And in fact, that's how I first got into this business. In fact, 8 years ago, REC, one of the leaders here, actually, we met them, and they actually sold us our property. Well, actually, they were the realtor for the sale of the property, and I actually went to look at properties with the intention of converting a single family home
I remember.
into a two-unit
Yeah.
building, right?
It's time's flying.
And that's when I first met you, actually.
That's right. Yeah, we did a showing in Durham.
In Durham, right?
Yeah.
So, and basically, what essentially happened was that we couldn't find a property or a service provider at the time, this is 8 years ago, that actually had enough expertise to guide us through that process. And my wife and I decided that, look, rather than try to figure this thing out, let's just buy a property with 2 units, which we ultimately end up paying a lot more for. So that's one of the benefits of having multiple units in a property like a duplex. You actually can sell, if you're selling it, it's valued at a higher price. So that's one of the benefits there.
And now that you've grown your organization and you work with countless investors, even just going through the process of making sure that they understand overall what they're trying to do to their properties. Can you just tell us a little bit about what Property Pathways does, Ronald?
Yeah, so we offer actually building permitting services, site selection services, as well as construction administration services, right? For real estate investors or anyone converting a single family property into multiple dwelling units, right? So that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's what we do. Now, in each of those areas, for example, selecting the ideal site for what your ultimate goal is, there's hundreds of steps and processes involved in what we do. When it comes to the building permitting as well, there's also hundreds of steps involved in what needs to be looked at and some of the decisions that need to be made along that process. And when it comes to also planning and the construction administration of that, like what do you need to consider? So those are the 3 areas that we help real estate investors.
And
in our business.
In your opinion, who is that right person, investor or end user, that would explore adding units to their property?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think so. I think first and foremost, I think it has to do with mindset. There has to be an understanding that once you're getting into real estate investing, especially this is not pre-construction, you're actually going to actively invest, and
you got to get a mortgage.
You got to get a mortgage. You got to get permits. So I think there has to be an appetite for some level of risk, right? That's going to be really key if you're intending to do this, which is actually, there's a lot of benefits to it. Without no risk, there's no reward, right? I mean, then there's risk in everything. This depends on what type of risk you want to take. But I will say that, you need to have a healthy appetite for some level of risk, because that's going to determine how much you're going to stick with the process, right? And I think that's something that we need to make sure we understand from upfront. The second thing that we like to know is that the person that's actually planning to purchase this property, like, this is not their life savings here. And I know I'm not a realtor, I'm not selling properties, but what I do know is that you need to have a healthy contingency.
For sure.
Not only budget contingency, but time contingency. So if someone comes to me and say, like, we want to purchase a property and we want to get this whole thing done in 3 months, I'd be like, this is not the right type of investment for you, because this process takes much longer and there's a lot of uncertainty. And
and you have to be able to stomach the time of actually doing the work.
Yeah.
Right? Because you still have to service the debt. You have to carry the property.
Oh yeah.
And I find right now, I run our portfolio management division, myself and some of our boots to the ground real estate experts. We help build plans for REC insiders. And one of my main questions I ask our insiders is, why are we considering investing in real estate? And it seems like quite an obvious question to ask somebody, right? But it's the question where people are the most taken a step back. They're used to just hearing about opportunities. They're used to just seeing numbers on a page and to say, okay, I want this because it does this. But no, I want to go back just one step, which is why are we even exploring this option? And the investors that I find that, we've connected with you and that have gone through the process of adding units to their property, their why is usually very similar. One of their whys is that they're trying to create like a multi-generational home for themselves. They're trying to make real estate work for their life, and they're trying to have their in-laws, their parents,
That's right.
their aging kids who now unfortunately are priced out of certain markets to actually make that work, make their lifestyle work with their property and their situation. But on the investment standpoint, I find the investors who typically, Ronald, want to add units to their property, it's one that they're trying to do like that smart hack. They're trying to, buy that single family home, live in the upstairs, rent out the basement to, stomach or reduce their living expenses. Or if they're doing it solely on the investment standpoint, they're the ones that have that 5 to 7 year window where they're trying to get out of the rat race of that 9 to 5. They need some income to supplement their loss of income.
Exactly.
And they at least want to leave an impression right now while they're still working. So when they do transition out of their 9 to 5, they at least have something that, one, they get a little bit of forced appreciation. And what forced appreciation is, everyone, is based off of the work you're doing to the property, how much does the value of the home increase to it? So that's not, pertaining to the value just increasing because of the area. That's called passive appreciation. It's the other side, right? It's the work you're doing to the property. How much does that increase the value? As well, you get some cash flow because, as I'm sure we all know, when you transition out of your 9 to 5 and you lose that income, it doesn't matter how much equity you built into your portfolio in most cases, unless your portfolio is substantial. The bank sees it, and if you don't have any income, it's very, very hard to leverage that capital or the equity, and to have future purchasing. You're always going to have to work with other investors, which is fine, but you're really pigeonholing yourself. And
great.
Ronald, I wanted to kind of go through. I'm a very system-oriented thinker.
Absolutely, go for it.
And I do that when I build investment plans for our REC insiders as well. I need to know who they are first and know their goals. I have this checklist in my mind. And for this conversation, I thought the way that I would want to think about this type of investment, I want to first go, even before we go, put a shovel in the ground, swing a sledgehammer at a wall. I want to go into like that discovery meeting first. And then I want to speak about, now that we've decided that this is right for us, what are our options as investors, and what's the process in regards to, who do we speak with, when do we engage the city? And then lastly, I want to talk about overall what to expect as a pro forma or as a return on your investment if someone is considering this opportunity. So let's run through, Ronald, first the discovery call or the discovery meeting.
Okay, good.
What are those questions you ask investors to see if it is right for them?
Well, I think the first thing that I want to know, and I think I talked a little bit about that, like I kind of want to know what's their appetite for risk and so forth. So all this is kind of being gauged. I'm not directly asking them what's their appetite for risk, but what are your plans? And just to kind of touch a little bit on what you just mentioned, I want to know which category of a client that I'm working with, because there's the pure real estate investor. That's the person who is trying to add units to a property, try to refinance it, and gain access to more capital so they can continue to repeat that process. The BRRRR strategy: buy, renovate, rent, refinance, repeat. Right? If you don't know that, Google it. BRRRR. Right? BRRRR.
It's essentially done in every property in Windsor.
Yes, that's right. Then there's flip to yourself strategy there. Correct. Right? So I want to know if it's that type of investor. I want to also know if you mention it, if it's someone who's trying to hack their property, right? Like it's like a house hack strategy. So you could do this with a single family home to 2 units. You can purchase a home with 4 units. You live in one and you rent the others. That's house hacking. Again, another investment strategy. I also want to know if the person is actually kind of what this is kind of new to this strategy. Is like there's some people who want to like kind of age in place. They might already own a home. They are downsizing. But they don't want to move from the community that they live in, so they can create these units and they can still live in the property. And then they got people who are actually trying to create a multi-generational living arrangement, right? So they're trying to create other units, maybe students kids coming back from school, they want to have like a detached suite for them, or something of
Yeah.
that nature, right?
Or
Like,
their parents are getting a little bit older, they want
yeah,
to be a little bit closer to them.
exactly. That's right. So that kind of sort of close care kind of setup.
Do you find, and sorry
Yeah.
for cutting you off
No
there,
worries.
I'm just going off on tangents. Do you find the people in that bucket, the ones that are trying to create these multi-generational homes, do you find a lot of the capital is brought to you by equity in their primary residence, that specific property? Or is it what they saved?
Yeah, so that's great. Is actually in most cases, people that are creating multi-generational living arrangements with other family members and so forth. Usually, what's happening is like a mother and a daughter, a son, a family member, siblings. Seldom siblings, usually parents and kids.
Yeah.
Like the parents would sell their home, and then they would actually combine their equity money with like some savings from the kids. They come together and they buy this other property that has the ability to create these living arrangements. So that's where we find a lot of that sort of, that's where the capital is kind of being raised from. In some cases, it's just like they have paid off for their mortgages in some way, and they have all this equity stored up there. So it's really good that they work with someone who's actually having those conversations, because a lot of time I speak with clients, and sometimes they don't even know they have the ability to do the things that they could do once they get off those calls with me. And I think it's really important that realtors also have that understanding of how to position a client for success.
And I'm sure you have like initial conversations, not that you're a mortgage broker.
No, I'm
about should I use a line of credit?
Exactly.
Should I refinance, or should I get construction financing?
Okay, good.
And sometimes there's no right answer. I find from my experience, the construction financing probably isn't the right route. If you're doing the 1 unit or 2 units, it's probably get the capital first and then go and do the work.
No, you're right. Well, actually, construction financing from definitely is not available from a federal level of, CMHC, for example. You'd have to go private, and that's probably pretty expensive. I mean, you could roll that into the purchase of the home, like a purchase plus or something of that nature. So a lot of people are doing that. But this is conversations that you have with your mortgage broker. I mean, if you're purchasing a property, see if you have the ability to either kind of get it kind of a lower down payment. So I'm asking these questions depending on the person. Right. So I talked about those 4 categories of people. In 2 of the cases, they don't own the home, and later 2, they own the property. Right. So we can hack that. We can prepare that sort of living arrangement where they're downsizing, or we can create a multifamily, and that's where we start getting into where are you going to get the capital to actually do the project that you're planning. Because I also want to say this, one of the main things that we do once we have gotten to know the client a bit, we want to know what is their intentions for the property, right? So this is very important. So we want to know what was their intentions, and this is really important because there's different uses you can apply, and this is very high level, I'm going to say here, but how we classify it is that there's your as of right use. So in some cases, and I like to think zoning. I don't think location, I just think zoning. So when I say as of right, what can be done as of right to achieve the best value on that property or increase the value on that property, right? Forced appreciation. So I look at what's the as of right use. So I always give that as a scenario. And then I look at what's the best use. What's the highest and best use? We all kind of heard this before, right? It was HBU, right? What's the highest and best use? And then I always say, like, what's your budget use? Because in some cases, a property might actually be able to add 4 units, right? That's the as of right use. You can do that, right? Or we can go through a slightly larger, more elaborate process and potentially get 10 units on that property, right? But maybe none of those uses actually
makes sense,
aligns with their budget. So budget becomes an extremely important conversation from the onset once you meet the client.
And then let's say we're doing a walkthrough on a property now. Okay, so we're having an investor that's determining that, should I purchase a single family home? And let's just talk about finishing a basement first, because there's the ability to add in ADUs, and that's a whole different walkthrough.
Okay, good.
So what do you look at, eye test wise to see, can this property actually make sense to add a unit to?
That's wonderful.
What's the eye test?
So, to that point, so as we talk to these clients, we want to know, okay, we got on the phone, okay, do you own this property? Yes, I own this property. well, is there a legal unit already in the property? This is important because maybe there's an existing unit and they want to add a second unit, a third unit, a fourth unit, right? So how many units are there? That's very important to know. That determines how complex the project is actually going to be. I also want to know if the property has an illegal or finished basement that might actually be rented out illegally, or maybe just that's what they actually want to use, because that also determines which part of compliance we're actually going to take.
Do you find that those types of properties, the ones that already have finished basements, non-conforming units, are those easier to work with? Are they harder?
That's actually really good. It's actually the more challenging projects to work with.
Wow.
I would prefer see a basement that is, and for very specific reason, not because there's some dislike for it or bias towards it, against it. The reality is, when you have a finished basement, we still need a finished basement that is not legal or lawful for rental purposes. When we have to make that unit lawful, we still have to comply with all the building code and zoning parameters and provisions. So what that means is that now we have to actually go look at the existing spaces and say, well, does this space match what the building code is requiring? Natural lighting, door sizing, room sizes, egress requirements, part of egress, ceiling heights. So we're looking at the space, and if something doesn't work, what happens is the perspective from most of those type of clients, they're saying, well, it's finished, it should be easy. Well, it's actually not easy, because now we're trying to maneuver and sort of figure out how to make something that doesn't work without ripping it apart, right? So those is more strategic, that you have to really be selective in what you're trying to do. In some cases, we may have to rename a bedroom an office, so we don't have to put a size requirement to it. But then what that does, that affects the ultimate, sort of reappraisal value of it, because now it's considered a one bedroom, even though it has two bedroom spaces. And there's all these little things. So we're having these conversations when we're looking at these. And I'll be honest, most clients don't really understand I'll be honest, sometimes I don't even understand why the building code is written the way it is. Why are zoning bylaws written the way it is? Why isn't it just simple? But this is what I get paid to do.
City by city as well, right?
City by city, right? The Ontario building code is Ontario, whereas bylaws are municipal. Those are like local bylaws, right?
And then what do you look at if someone wanted to add that ADU or the auxiliary dwelling unit when you're walking through that property?
Yeah. Okay. So so talking about what it is we look at. So when we come to a property, the first thing. So and this is kind of just the tips that I apply, and we'll talk a little bit about the brunch special, right?
Yeah.
But what I'll say is, like, we would go out to site, and I would say, I look at a few things just on the street, and every realtor, every investor should just have this eye. It's like, you want to look where the lot is located. Is it a corner lot? Is it an interior lot? And there's very specific definitions for these things. Is the lot located between other lots? Is it located on an intersection? Does the lot have access on both ends to two streets? Is it like what is called a true lot? Right? So I'm looking at that. I'm looking to see if the neighborhood is a mature neighborhood. Why? Because that also determines what type of building code requirements are going to be applied. If it is, if
and
the
you
building,
mean mature as in, like, is the area older, or is it a newer subdivision?
Yeah, that's right.
Not the people living.
Not the people, no. Not that it's an elderly population, no. That's not what we're looking at. That might be a little biased, right?
Well, I would say sometimes you might get a little bit harder of neighborhood approval sometimes on some of this construction, I find.
Well, it's definitely if you push the limit. But with that said, as far as the neighborhood goes, we're looking for whether it's a mature neighborhood. We want to see where the fire hydrant is located. Yeah, I know. I'm not a dog. I'm not looking to go, but I'm looking for fire hydrants, right? Because that really determines whether or not we can actually position a garden suite at a certain distance away from the property, right? That's really important, because we have to maintain a 45-meter distance from the street to the garden suite at the back of the property. But we also need to maintain that 45. If the fire hydrant is more than 90 meters away from the property, then that becomes a problem as well. Building code requirements. So I'm looking at all of these things when I'm looking at the property. And listen, you can do this, by the way, without actually visiting the property. Just Google Street View. You just up and down the street, like find the hydrant, and you right click, you measure it and see, okay, does this make sense? On one of our past projects, we actually we encountered this challenge, and what we had to do as a recourse was actually sprinkler the unit.
Oh,
Which,
because
as
it
you
was
can
too
see,
far away
it was
from
too
the.
far. Yeah, that's right. So
I learn
these are
something new every
things.
time.
Yeah, like you
Every
know, so
time.
these are some of the nuances that we look at. So again, on the street, we're looking for mature trees. We want to see the trees are mature, because if we see little baby trees, chances are, when I say baby trees, these are what do you would call it? Like new trees.
Yeah.
Right? New trees. Those trees like kind of indicate that this is a newer subdivision to some degree. And if you're in a subdivision that is less than 5 years in age, it has more rigorous or restrictive building code requirements. So this is all things that we take into account. It drives costs. It also really drives in terms of expectation, like what you can come to expect as you do the project, right?
Well,
that's a full house you guys got here, huh?
That's what I'm telling
It's
you.
like spilling out there.
Taylor Swift who?
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift who?
Oh, Taylor Swift is coming?
Yeah, Taylor Swift's coming after.
Oh yeah, all right, stay tuned.
Yeah, Taylor Swift and Mike Tyson.
And Mike.
Yeah. So, did you watch the fight yesterday?
No, man, but this guy's been practicing. Like this guy trains like hard. He's dangerous. Right?
Yeah, it's
wow.
It was a wild one.
Yeah.
I learn something new every time, because I had a conversation with a contractor, actually. This was a few months ago, and I learned that I always thought that if it was a legal suite, a basement suite, that you would have to separately meter the hydro. And that's not the case. I learned that. You can run it with one line, and that's something that I learned. I learned about the fire hydrant today. And the reason why I brought up the ADU for everyone here is that is such a talking point right now that I'm having with investors, because of the necessity of trying to create cash flow and make a deal make sense in these types of markets, especially when you're not seeing 8, 9, 10% per year compounded growth. And I think we all have different opinions on where we think the market is going to go. I personally believe that we're probably not going to see the appreciation that we saw in the previous decade. Yeah. Which means that investors are trying to be more creative and more strategic with the opportunities that they're looking into, and what they're trying to maximize their current portfolio. And that's more the conversations I'm having with investors that have legal duplexes, deep lot, trying to explore adding a third unit to that property. And there's such a boom right now in these prefab auxiliary dwelling units, which makes sense on a capital standpoint to purchase. But again, it's not right for everybody. And that's when we go and speak to, and all investors, I would recommend speaking to groups like Ronald to explore, right? Does it make sense for me to spend $200,000 for this standalone structure based off of the area, or even if the property can permit it, right? So now, Ron, I want to talk about the process. Once an investor or a homeowner has decided, yes, I now want to go and create a legal suite inside my property. Run me through the process now. What is the very first thing that we need to engage as an investor?
Yeah, so the first thing you need to engage for sure is not a, I think one of the biggest misconceptions here, and this has been the general practice for all persons purchasing properties. And what I'm going to say, I don't mean it in the wrong, so do not take this in the wrong way, but a home inspection is not the most inspection when you're planning to convert a property. It is just simply not. And you need to, what I would call, what we do for our clients is a zoning inspection, right? Like that's actually much more important when you're planning to add dwelling units. Now you still need to know if the property can be converted and so forth, but why would you care if your basement is leaking if you're going to underpin it? Yeah. Right? Like why would you care about that? Like that's the least important thing. You want to know, is your property line close enough or far enough from the adjacent property so you can actually add a window, an egress window, window well. Like that's the kind of things that is more important than there's a crack in the window, right? Like your windows need replacing, right? So that's going to be a very nominal cost, and you will have to do that anyway, right? If you're going to be adding these units. So that's very important that we walk the client through that process. So in terms of steps, And maybe I'll ask one question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Like, can I get a show of hands of everybody who lives on a property? Right? I'm sure that's everyone. Right? I live on a property. The reason why I'm asking this, and it might seem very, very silly, but if you live on a freehold property and you own that property, chances are you have the ability to add a detached accessory dwelling unit, right? And that's an opportunity because there's a lot of upzoning happening throughout
Yeah.
Ontario. And we covered the entire Ontario. We go as far as Sudbury in rare cases, by the way. We did 2 properties out in Sudbury. But with that said,
The drive is beautiful. I
Yeah.
just did the drive for a
Oh, it's-
wedding
it's so
earlier
nice.
this year. It's a very nice drive.
it's a very nice drive. There's no traffic. It's nothing like
And
Toronto.
just through the rocks.
Yeah,
nice.
it's so
the
nice.
Canadian Shield. It's nice.
But I would say this, if you own a property, chances are you can actually increase the density or add multiple units to that property, and you have to speak with the right people, right? So I'm sure Tyler is going to extend that to everyone here and everyone listening online, but you guys can certainly connect. We'll have a very quick 5-minute call within 5 minutes, in fact, within 2 minutes. Maybe I think I have a record for like 30 seconds, right? Like I can determine what's the highest and best use of a property,
And
right?
I have my opinions on why the Ontario government is trying to, allow a little bit more in regards to density in your single family residences or your primary residence.
Yeah.
Why do you think the Ontario government is really trying to, allow a little bit more, leeway, or give to putting extra units on your property?
Well, for sure, there's an obvious housing crisis, but I think there's also a lot of lobbying happening as well for just more densities in areas. Everybody know about the, I guess the green belt situation there, but of course that was repealed. But look, I would say, and I'm not saying this, but this is actually fact. In 1994, I was still a little pollywog, right? Like tadpole. Back in 1994, that was when they kind of first introduced this idea of adding a second suite in your basement.
Yeah.
And there was just a lot of pushback. And honestly, it's only up until 2024. This is
Correct.
Think about this. This is like 20 years? 20
30
years later.
30 years.
30 years?
Yeah.
30 years later. This is we're now actually doing this as of right? 30 years. So, but with that said, what we have seen is
And
in
you're
the
right.
last
I think
5
that's
years,
why,
right?
though. I think it's it's the missing middle, right? We see a lot of high-rise development coming up. Less subdivisions now because a lot of builders are trying to maximize profits as well as maximize dwelling units, building up. But I think there's a missing middle, which is, homeowners being able to add units, which will help provide supply.
Exactly. So there's this idea of the yellow belt being all neighborhoods, and they really want to add density to there because there's actually a real case for that, a financial case for municipalities, by the way. Of course, if you build beyond the green belt or build within the green belt or anywhere around there, that's considered sprawl. You can't just build a house on a piece of land. There has to be infrastructure. There's infrastructure, soft and hard infrastructure, meaning roads, electrical, sewage, water. Then there's community centers, police stations, fire stations,
Schools.
and there's all these things. This is huge investments out there. Whereas they can take this existing infrastructure that we have and maximize it.
Yes.
Right. So there's a real savings involved here as well. However, it has its own unique challenges, but it's a better option, right? So that's why we're seeing there's just so much push from federal level, municipal level, as well as provincial level to really fund this type of missing middle type of density.
So then first is zoning, right? You do a zoning inspection. And then once we deem that, let's first talk about the income suite in the basement, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Once we deem that we can do this,
yes.
What is next?
Yeah, so once we determine that the property actually meets all the zoning requirements and we can't do it, what it is we do next as a service provider, we actually start the building permitting process. This is actually quite a unique process. It's very different from a custom home. With a custom home, no one is coming out to the property to assess and make sure what's there and how it could be reused, essentially, right? How you can retrofit it or repurpose it. There's nothing there we're going to be building from scratch or demolishing an existing building from scratch. However, when we're doing these conversions, what we have to do is go out and actually measure the site. Well, I would say back in the golden days, right? There we had to go out with pen, pad, and measuring tape, and 2 guys are there sketching on pads and so forth. Well, I did that as part when I in a past life, right? I did that in a past life. today what we use is we use 3D laser scanning. So we actually implemented this 3D laser scanning technology during the pandemic when we had to social distance. So we actually invested in a device that actually would, I can set it up here on a tripod and it would measure the entire room, right? So I didn't have to touch anyone's belongings or person, and so forth. So people really liked that. But we found it to be just make it more efficient. In fact, we didn't need as much team members that we needed before to hold the measured tape and verify measurements and stuff.
It's probably more accurate too.
It's definitely more accurate, even to a 16th of an inch. So this is really important when you're taking an existing property and you're converting it into multiple dwelling units. Because when you're going through that process, you need to take the existing building, you need to determine how it fits into the context. And we're not only changing the use of the building, we're changing the class of the building, the Ontario Building Code. We'll look at things very differently, right? So we're looking at how the building, the parcel of land with the development on it, which is the existing home, how it fits into the context of the surroundings. And then we're also measuring and taking the data, capturing all the data of the inside, where all your, what's your ceiling
Ducts,
heights,
like
where your ducts are, where your water meter is, where your clean outs, where your structural beams are, where your windows are located. These are all things that we have to take into account, because remember, we're as much as we're trying to build these new spaces, we're also still keeping cost in mind. And because I said when we began, like, I'm an investor first, I always think budget. And sometimes when I'm dealing with new homeowners and stuff, like, they're like, well, I have the money, like, don't, like, why are you trying to save me so much, right? But I'm always thinking, how can I save, right?
You might need it.
You might need it.
Let's not spend it here.
Exactly. So why tear a window out when we don't have to?
And
right?
you're doing you're using this 3D scanner to then draw like a blueprint or a design.
Exactly.
Right?
So we take that data, it produces what is called a point cloud. We then extract. So essentially, when we leave from a property, we leave with the property in a digital format, right? And we take the property with us, we import it into our design software, and we create a digital twin of the property. And we then, of course, are able to walk the client through all of the nuances of it. We replicate the property structurally, mechanically, as well as spatially, right?
So and then you know how, like, you know exactly what needs to be done in regards to, all of these different, zoning requirements or permitting building requirements, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And then I'm sure what you do is then, okay, here is bare minimum what we have to do.
Yeah.
Here's how we might be able to maximize maybe
wonderful.
another room.
Yeah.
Or here's how we might be able to save some space on the kitchen.
That's right.
So we can get a little bit more living or more light, whatever that is, right? There are options.
Listen, that's like you might actually be a great team member. Just let me know if you ever open to it. All right,
Ronald,
I'll tell you this, man. Like, because the reality is, this is exactly what we do for clients. We actually prepare, and I'm sure in most businesses that's what people do. They create options, but that's exactly what we do, because we want to produce when we're on site. We're not only capturing all the data from the actual site, we're actually collecting all the data from, like, all audible data from the client. Like, what do you think? And the client is giving us all this input, and we're recording all of this, we're taking all of this. Now, what we try to do is we try to create a client option. Sometimes the client have an idea. They just have an idea, so we create that option for them. They want this bedroom there, this bedroom there. In fact, case in point, I met with a client on a property. The client said to me, you know what, I'm purchasing this home. I want to add a second unit to it. I said, sure, no problem. See, like, I want to put a 2-bedroom up here, 2-bedroom down here. So that's exactly what we did. We did that for the client as option 1. But we created a second option. The second option was an option where he could, as of right, convert the property into a triplex with 3 bedrooms each. Right? Now, that, of course, added tremendous value to the project. Now, keep in mind, there is a budgetary constraint there as well. Yeah. Could he afford to add 3 units to the property? It's a larger renovation.
Well, that's why you do the 3 options, right?
That's why we did it. Well, we did 2 options. And then once we present the option on a live Zoom call to the client, we then create what we call a hybrid option.
Oh, nice.
So that option is the option where the client has input into one of the options that we created, and we ideate and we form a third option. That's usually the option that most people is interested in.
And then once they decide that, okay, this is the plan that we have in place, and I'm sure, the boxing analogy I said Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, and sometimes I'm sure you have to adjust these plans. But once you have this idea, okay, then you go and bring it to the city.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then you have to get the permits to start the process, right?
Yeah,
How long does that usually take? I know every
Yeah.
city is different, but like, do you have like a ballpark number
yeah.
or date?
Yeah, but before I give that date, I think this is a good story about the punch in the face situation. While I laugh about it, it's actually really serious. The truth is, once we go through this process, because there's just so many factors involved, sometimes there's things that all things are not considered as we move through the process. But as we get closer to the end, there is things that we realize, like, oh, we know we can change this, we can do things differently, and so forth. There's a specific project that we looked at. We completed the design. Client was very happy. We moved forward with the option. However, once they got quotations, we are not builders. We don't provide quotes on construction. I may be able to give an idea of what things may cost, but I don't give construction quotes.
Yeah.
Now, after the client got the quote, they said, well, whoa, this thing is actually going to cost a lot. Hence the reason we always say, we always invite, if we're working with a client, we actually, as a step, we like to invite two people onto the call. One is a quality real estate focused investor, realtor, right? So that's very important.
Rental analysis.
Exactly.
Potential value.
Exactly. So I've called you in the past and I've asked you, say, hey, could you please assist these clients? They're looking to put this type of unit mix in this property. Like, will they be able to get the rents to actually produce the returns that they're expecting?
Yeah.
Right. That's very important. Then the second.
That was an interesting one. Just going through the rental analysis there. Like the difference, it was such a huge difference on rents. Just, I'm a big numbers guy. I remember these types because I was amazed, actually, the difference of rent from in that specific micro market in Scarborough, by Rouge. Of a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom, it was an incredibly, like, it was more than $1,200 a month additionally, and it was a lot. I didn't expect it to be that much of a difference in monthly rental difference.
So that really is that is so we right size that component as well. But it's really important that we also bring on a contractor. We work a lot with contractors in various regions in Ontario. And we like to just bring on one of the contractors, though you're not married to that not recommendation, but the suggestion. That person we're bringing on is going to help really ensure that the budget is within what it is you're thinking. And that person will provide you with a quote. And that's a quote that you can also consider. But having those two professionals join me on those design Zoom calls is actually really important to make sure that this is not about me, it's not about you or the contractor, it's about the client. Is the client going to ultimately get the most out of this project, right? And that's really important.
And that's why, for everyone here, understanding your why is very important. Like, even talk about this, okay? From us, let's say this is a property they're buying, okay? They don't own this property already. The process from you seeing opportunities, finding maybe one that could work, doing the 3D scanning, to the plans, to the Zoom call, that's how much work? That's right? And,
no, that's a lot of work.
And if your why isn't strong enough, or if your why isn't solid enough, where it actually makes sense for where you are right now, it doesn't matter about our time, but it's your time and your potential capital and the mistakes that potentially could come up if you don't have that strong why. And once that all happens, right? Oh, so that call would happen before you go to the city, right?
Oh yeah, that call happens. So nothing, by the way, so we don't move. So that's kind of, if I want to say, that's kind of that's the climax of the whole thing there, right?
Yeah.
Like that whole design. So we went through the site selection, we are making our way up the hill here, and we're like, okay, now we have actually gone through the site measure, we have met with the client, we know their needs, we prepare these design options. So now really, this is now back on the client. The client now has to make a decision. If you are working with us, you have to make a decision before we move forward with actually preparing permit drawings. Because once we move from the point of design, from that point on, it's a downhill. Like we're going through all the building code requirement, we're implementing it. We're also, you're selecting a contractor, all the engineering needs to be done.
Supplies are being bought.
All these things are starting to be considered and really starting to be finalized. So that's why it's really important. At that point, we actually need a sign off. Like, and our process is very digital. We use lots of AI, right? But we, this is the world we live in today. So we use a lot of AI and a lot of prompting and automations. So you'll find like things that once you complete one process, for example, sign off, then you're going to be able, you'll get the necessary documentations to know that we're moving forward. So really important that the client signs off.
And then now on the construction side, because again, you're not a builder yourself, but you put everybody together. You're more of the quarterback.
Well, maybe what I'll say is, so we actually built, and this is very unique with what it is we do. So during the pandemic, we actually ran a construction division of Property Pathways, right? And we renovated roughly around 24 properties. Generally managed about almost, it was a fair bit of capital we managed on behalf of our real estate investor clients. And that was actually really helpful. That helped me to understand all the nuances that happened after the design. But something more important came out of that? Now, my designs, the designs that we produce is way more informed and detailed.
Practical.
Contractors love our drawings because they're like, look, you know what? This is actually stating what is going to be built, right? And generally speaking, when our drawings are approved, it usually, there's no need for additional conversation. Though we open that up, contractors are allowed to call us, clients are allowed to call us throughout the duration of the project, but our drawings contain sufficient enough detail so that it can be done. And I'll be happy to show anybody this. It's very different from what's currently out there, because there's two really type of drawings. There is permitting drawings, and then there's construction drawings, right? Permitting drawings just can have the bare minimum code requirement. Construction drawings, on the other hand, needs to detail how things are going to be connected, where things are actually going to go in your washroom, how's your kitchen going to be laid out. There's various amount of details that need to be sort of communicated. So I like to tell clients, when you hire me, you're hiring me to speak to not only you, but you're hiring me to speak to the contractor, to the building inspector, as well as the plan examiners. So I'm speaking to 4 people on your behalf, and those drawings need to speak that language. Yeah.
I have a few questions, but a show of hands for everyone here, like, who finds this valuable, and who would use someone like Ronald to actually go through the process and adding units? I would, right here. How many people wouldn't raise their hand anyways if I asked them? So my question, Ronald, is in regards to now the construction side.
Yes.
I'm in
Let's
it now.
do it.
Okay,
Let's
we're
do
doing
it.
it. Well, I got the contracting team. You're going to be overseeing the process. Is there certain renovations or changes to the property that you see come up? You're like, okay, this is going to be a little bit more of a harder job, but are you sure you want to do this? Like, what are those things that investors sometimes want to do that you try to say, I think you should shy away from this?
Yeah, I would always shy away from relocating or removing a furnace. Once you touch a furnace, it's essentially costing you just as much as if you're installing a new one. Right, so I try to stay away from that, like as much as possible. In fact, when we look at I'm going to use a sort of a case here. We have an existing wartime bungalow, and with the basement, we're gutting the basement to install this unit. There's a few things that we're actually designing around. We're designing around the furnace room, or the furnace unit, not necessarily the room, but the unit, because we don't want to move ducts and everything like that. And we're also designing around the location of the interior stairs, wherever the stairs is. In some cases, it doesn't work. We have to put in new stairs if you have a stairs that's located in the center of the property. A lot of those new subdivisions and so forth, that's where the stairs is. So we have to add an basement walkout or something. Exactly, right? Yeah. So we design around those two elements. And those are things like sometimes we are capturing this from the onset.
Yeah.
The other thing that we also try to do from a design standpoint, which filters through into construction, is that we want to make sure, in fact, this filters all the way through to when you're operating the property. We want to make sure that bedrooms are above bedrooms or below, whichever you want to call it. That's because what we like to say, we create respectful units. So you have to intentionally want to disturb the other occupants of the units. So what we try to do is try to layer those bedrooms. So we layer the sleeping areas, right? We layer the entertaining areas, and we try to layer as well the service areas, like the furnished rooms and the kitchen sinks and toilets, just because we can stack all of the plumbing. So these are all of the things that we take into account when we're actually doing these properties. So I know, like, like I say, like, listen, I mean, listen, and by the way, I'll just put it out there. You guys, I'm a part-time dentist, so you guys can come. I'll give you guys a good checkup, clean up, get some scaling done. Absolutely not, right? You're never going to go to a dentist and ask for construction advice or design advice. And I have lots of people who come to me all the time and they have all these suggestions. And this is great, by the way. I take it into account, but I always do what's in their best interest, right? So with that said, definitely, if this is what you're planning to do, like, we offer the full range of consultation from beginning to end. We'll make sure the projects are successful.
And then now when the property is completed, okay, we've added in this unit, the secondary or tertiary unit, or fourplex in the standalone property.
Yeah.
That's usually when our investment team comes in, because now we want to, first and foremost, obviously, if it's going to be used as a rental, we're going to try to find these qualified tenants. We're going to try to obviously maximize some of the return on your investment that you just made, because there's a lot of capital up front. And I find that there's a misconception, or maybe not a misconception, but there's unrealistic returns on your investment that aren't in line with today's market. And I find that some investors, what they're trying to do, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ronald, but this is just, I'm a big performer guy. I like to run performers all the time. And I can't make the numbers work if you're trying to get forced appreciation and instantly like double the money you put into your rental job. But you can't to the conversion. I always find if you're trying to convert, add units to the property, it's not about getting the capital that you've already put in instantly out, through that forced appreciation, through the refinance. The numbers just don't work. It really doesn't. There's obviously special cases where it would, but these types of opportunities need to be the ones where you're trying to have a great long-term hold in your property. You're trying to force appreciation, but you're not instantly getting that money back. Or as well, you're actually just trying to get some cash flow in markets or opportunities that don't get cash flow. And that's really important. And I'm right there, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. So, there's different markets.
It's not for a flip.
It's not a flip. I would say, generally speaking, what it is, I believe, is most advantageous when we're working with clients is that and we talked about kind of this initial process of kind of just qualifying whether the client is going to be a right fit, is basically just trying to get an understanding of, do they intend to hold this property, or are they trying to flip this for a quick buck? Because that does not exist, especially if you're just adding one additional dwelling unit.
And you're at the mercy of the market.
You're at the mercy of the market.
If you're trying to flip.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you remember, these turnkey properties, they have to cash flow. Otherwise, no one's buying them, right? Like so what I would say is, once you get into those projects, the intention has to be to hold it. Even if you plan to sell it, you have to be ready to hold that property, right? Because if you're not, then again, you're setting yourself up for failure, right?
And really, like, ballpark number, like, I know every job is different, but in regards to timeline, like, we're looking like, if you're trying to finish a basement, it's not going to take you 2 months. That's going to be like a 4 to 6 month job minimum. Right? So if we're doing this work for 6 months, carrying the property for 6 months, for you to flip it and make maybe $10,000 off of it, that's to me, that's such a risky type of investment for that small amount. Whereas if you just hold it, rent it out, allow the market to grow around you, allow you to get more rents every year through tenant turnover, through raising rents as well. You get that forced appreciation off the bat anyways, right? When you're finishing the unit.
So with regards to time, the construction process, so the design process would take, for a 2-unit conversion, this is just generally what we have seen, right? The design process on our end, you engage us, and the time it takes to get the drawings into the city would take anywhere between 3 weeks to 4 weeks, right? Depending on the complexity, engineering, and so forth. The time it would take to get from the city submission to approval, that's usually takes, and this, take this with a grain of salt, every municipality is different depending on time of year, Christmas time, they go on vacation. There's less staff involved. Like everybody who know, like I know. In fact, I'll just kind of digress here, but every city, if you're submitting drawings into the city right now, chances are you're not going to get it back until end of January, right? Because
So that's
yeah,
already
absolutely.
that's
Yeah,
already
then,
what?
then,
That's already 3 months then.
oh yeah, yeah, and that might be fast, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, the Brampton.
I heard St. Catharines. That's what you were saying.
So yeah, I mean, so maybe to touch on that a bit, we cover a lot of projects in the GTA, Toronto. We cover Hamilton quite a bit, St. Catharines, Welland, Brantford, Kitchener, Cambridge, Mississauga, and Brampton. We do a bit of projects as well, and we do a ton load in Peterborough, and we and now in the last year and a half with Bill 23 and Bill 185 and so forth, there's just a lot of attention coming right back into Toronto. So Toronto really is the place to be, especially if you're thinking of building long-term wealth, because why? There's a lot of really upzoning happening, a lot of as-of-right provisions. And if you have the capital and the budget, you can actually do those conversions in Toronto. You can make them cash flow if you size the projects correctly in the right neighborhoods. And then also you would be able to have that passive appreciation,
Yeah.
which is great in Toronto. And of course, these assets that we're talking about, what we also do in addition to our design work, because we're now helping so many clients, we also are looking, and we talked about a little bit of federal involvement in terms of why does this make sense for them? It makes sense for them because that's where they're putting their money. Follow the money, you'll know what's making sense for the city, for these cities, right? So what we have seen is that there's lots of funding out there. So we actually do what we call a RIGS research. So we look at whether there's rebates, incentive, grants, and subsidies available for your property, for your conversions, how you can get money back.
Yeah, like if you make it more energy
Make it more
efficient.
energy efficient, or sometimes it's just like, look, if you're going to sort of subscribe to an affordable unit, the city will actually give you a forgivable loan for a period of time. You have to have an agreement with them, right? So these are things that we'll actually look into to make sure. So this is over and above. We also do some over and above sort of consultation on CMHC, because that plays a lot into what it is we're doing, only if your project or property actually lends itself to 5 units or more, right? So whether it be a 4 plus 1, exactly. So we work with realtors who realtors, but also mortgage brokers who specialize in that. And again, we are not saying to use these folks, but we're saying, yes, you need to get this consultation, because this is how what we're designing is actually going to achieve your end goals, right? We are not just thinking design handoff and then bye-bye, Mr. and Mrs. Client. We're saying, look, this is going to be a long-term relationship here. We want to see your success in this to the end, and we're helping with the broad scope of things, even though we're not physically touching it, right?
That's right. Well, and you're the quarterback.
That's right.
Like
the quarterback,
you're putting everything together. You're making sure that it makes sense and it gets that investor or that homeowner from point A to point B, which is, I'm sure, the in between the point A to point B can go in many different directions, and so you got to go back and forth.
Well, that's so important, and that's why I said the work that I do, I have to tell the truth. Unfortunately or fortunately, I have to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, right? Like, because why? I am actually engaged in that relationship for the long term. And not probably I mightn't want to, but I have to. In fact, even when you have done the renovation and moved on, if something happened to that property, they're going to say, who did the designs? Right? So you have moved on, you have gotten your profits and moved on, but I'm still responsible for those designs. Right? So again, everything that I do, it has to be done with a very high level of integrity, and because I'm on the line for it. So all my advice comes from a place of really truth. Sometimes it hurts, and it's better it hurt and you don't decide, or it hurts and you decide like you're going to move forward anyway.
Yeah,
right?
you want it to hurt before you make the decision.
Yeah, absolutely.
Know
that. Yeah.
And I'm sure everyone here, Ronald, and watching us virtually can tell like how passionate you are about this.
I love this stuff.
Like, we went into fire hydrants, we went into the nitty gritty of it all, and we did a lot of talking today. Does anyone here have any questions before we, Cloud?
Hey, we're not considering doing this, but if we were, there there's a house just around the corner to us
Mhm.
that is the identical house to ours. The, there was a front entrance made in front of the house to
Mhm.
make to do a
Awesome.
basement
Yeah.
unit. It was done at the beginning of the subdivision, at the request of the client, by the builder.
Yeah. Mhm.
So, if I approached this person and could get drawings of the of what the builder did, what would that be advantageous? A big savings.
And then let me just rephrase the question just for everyone watching us virtually. So the question was, if we see a home that's identical or almost identical to subject property, the property that you own that you're thinking of doing changes to, would it be advantageous or speed up the process if you get the drawing somehow from the design company or the unit owner?
The unit owner, if you purchase, from the unit owner.
From the owner of that property.
For one, this is like kind of like streamlined. This kind of comes naturally to me. Like, you never look at what was done in your neighborhood and think like it could be done on your property. That's probably number one. This because every property is unique. Every property is unique. It may not seem that way. But secondly, we don't know, and in your case, it seems like you do. But in most cases, you don't know if that person did that lawfully or unlawfully, right? So you say like, oh, this person put like a deck up in the front of their home. I want to do that. Well, they may not have done a permit for it, right? And now you're going through the permitting process, and we find out that we have to go to the committee or even a larger process involved. So to your point, though, I would say, yeah, if you can get the drawings, if it's a direct replica of what it is you own, and you can get those drawings, you would still need to reproduce it. The city would not accept those. You'd have to have it reproduced, and some form of designer, engineer, architect, or BCI designer will have to actually take responsibility for the submission, or you, the homeowner, can do that yourself.
It's at least a starting point, though.
Yeah, it is a decent starting point.
It's a decent starting point.
But again, don't hold your service provider to what was done. Let them do their process and understand if this can be repeated on your property, right?
Would the permits not be available visibly on the property to show that it is permitted? Because you were saying we don't know if it is. When I put things on my property, I have to put a permit up in the window or on the property.
Yeah. But this was done. I'm suspecting
No,
this was
saying
okay in general. Yes. So when you work on a property, yes, I do advise that if you in most cases, if you don't have a permit, you don't place your placard like visible, right? However, that's a requirement, by the way. If you
I have nosy neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely.
To find out if I have a permit.
So that's right. So if you actually do in fact have a permit, you must put it up, because here's what can happen, right? Even though you have a permit, you don't place that placard up that says permit and has a number on it. One of your neighbors can just be sitting there and say, like, you know what, with their morning coffee, and be like, why is that bin over there? You know what? I'm gonna make some calls, right? And they make some calls. They come, and even though you have a permit, you you're not complying with all the provisions of the permit if you're not posting that placard. So you could get fined, minor, by the way, isn't it, like a few $100 or so? But you could get fined, or you could probably get the project even delayed, because now they're saying, well, you have to stop until you can produce this. Now you have to go, guys have to come off the site, you have to go print this thing, put it back on there, and all these other things. So it's a very regulated process. So please, just follow the process. We have clients that always ask us, like, is this, should I get a permit? My answer is always, well, you cannot use me if you're not.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, you need to get a permit.
Hi, I just want to understand what's considered a duplex triplex, because I've seen some houses that has like a separate walkout door, or it seems like it's a separate unit, but what is considered legally a duplex triplex? And my second question is, if you did a so-called, if you inherited a illegal secondary suite and rent that out, is there like a issue with that? I've heard of some people doing it anyways. So,
Oh boy.
So the question is for everyone watching virtually, was what is considered a legal duplex or triplex? And then what are the ramifications or implications if you rent out a non-conforming unit, so inherit a non-legal, rental unit. What are the potential risks that you do inherit?
Yeah. So for the first question, well, how you know if it's a triplex or a duplex? I mean, it's very difficult to tell from the outside. That's the great thing about these missing middle homes, is like you're taking a regular home, you're not changing the form of it, you're just adding you're adding in a very secretive way multiple units within.
Yeah.
So in a very, I should say, strategic way, you're adding units within, so that way you don't change the appearance of the building. Now, when I look at a property, some of the things that I look at, and I think some of you will just nod to this, is like, I look to see if there are multiple meters, multiple electric meters on the home. That is a good indication that there's more than one unit there. I would look to see if there is also multiple exits or entrances. On a single family home, there's usually 2 entrances, so that's kind of common. Again, if you're just looking at the property and you see multiple vehicles parked out in a very unusual way, chances are it's multiple units. But there's no real way of knowing if it's a unit, if it's a legal triplex or duplex, without actually looking at the building permit documentation. And you can also call your city. You can also call your city and say, I mean, this is something. By the way, the municipalities will never come out to your property accidentally. They don't. It's not they're just simply walking by and say like, I'll stop by and see if this property is legal. Someone has to call and make an inquiry, right? So, and you can make an inquiry on your own property. It does take some time, so that's why in most cases when you buy a property, you don't have enough time during a week of conditional period to do that type of building permit due diligence. But there are some ways you can kind of just look at it and see. So
one thing I've seen investors do if they wanted to confirm if it is a legal duplex or triplex compared to a non-conforming, is they can write a condition in the offer that the owner supplies them with those building permits or those approvals. And I think especially in today's market where we have, as buyers, a little bit more flexibility in the Greater Toronto area to negotiate, to tie things up, with inspections and these types of conditions, you have to use it to your advantage compared to something like more of a hotter market where you can have these conditions. I still would always protect myself as a purchaser. But there are times, in hot markets where we'd have to, we'd put it in, but then we would lose that offer because someone went in firm, no conditions, that they're just going to buy it and inherit the risk. And I just think, it's different if it's your primary residence, I think, especially on the permitting side. But if it's your income property, I always took the approach of never being urgent with this investment anyways. And if someone doesn't want to work with you because they're not providing you with this type of data that you need to make your informed decision, it's probably not the right property for you. Take a step back, look into a different market, or look into the 12 other homes that are listed around it.
And that's actually a really good comment. And in fact, what it is, and we kind of talked about this. One of the conditions that we actually share with our realtor type partners is like, look, you know what, you guys should put a condition that you want to have not just a home inspection, but a zoning inspection. Your designer is physically going to walk the property. And again, depending on the scale of the project, the type of project, the conversion, that's going to be more valuable, as I mentioned earlier, than a home inspection. Because you want to know what's the headroom clearances and so forth that are associated with that, where you're going to add in windows. Would this actually comply without having to meet rigorous fire separation requirements and stuff like that? That's actually more important than knowing if your foundation is cracked or if there's a leak in the basement, right? Because you're going to eventually be doing that anyway, which we show in our drawings. To answer your question regarding legal non-conforming property that you inherited, that you found out after the fact because you received a notice to comply from the city, let's say, for example, there's really no way of knowing that in advance, with the exception of what it is Tyler has mentioned. But how you resolve that after the fact, it is still by going through this same building permitting process. So there's nothing less. The only thing is that your request to me might be, hey, Ronald, I do not want to demolish this space. And I'll say, I'll try my best to salvage as much of what is existing as possible. I can't guarantee it, but we have to go through the same building permitting process, the same zoning bylaw, building code review, and so forth to make it successful.
And what I have seen, and again, Ronald touched on it, that it's only when the city does knock on the door to see how you're operating this property, does it really happen? But there are risks, obviously. And then the one main challenge now is that your house is flagged. You will have to, if you do want to use it as a rental, you will now have to go through this this process. And you would, if it's already rented, you might get a fine anyways from the beginning. But also, you're going to now have to find accommodation for that basement tenant while you're doing that work to the property, and then give them the ability to move back in.
And maybe I'll just add here, when we come out to do a zoning, when we come out to do a zoning review on a property that you might want to purchase for the purposes of converting it, we do a 25-point inspection. It's really a building code inspection and zoning bylaw inspection, where we want to make sure that the property actually meets these requirements, and we wouldn't require to do anything over and above what would be typical, right? And if something appears to be like it's going to require more or additional resources and time, then of course we're going to convey that to you so you can make a better informed decision. And some things, as I mentioned, let us say, for example, something requires you have to go to the committee of adjustment. Well, now your 4-month building permit timeline for approval now stretches out to like 6 months in total, 7 months in total. So that's extra 3 months carrying cost.
Yeah.
Like, is that something that you have thought of? So that's why the zoning review, this building code review from a qualified designer is extremely important when you're deciding to do these type of projects. A single family home, get your home inspection. That's none. In these type of properties, by the way, you can get your home inspection, but you can also get me in or someone like myself to do what I just mentioned.
In
right?
addition to, for sure.
Right?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I feel like a lot of, especially investors or purchasers to do that house hack type of approach should definitely use services that Ronald spoke about, because these are ones that are very seldomly spoken about, right? Like, I've worked with investors, I've worked with other realtors who put these types of deals together. I haven't seen many use that condition on the zoning inspection, which is great. And we got a question in the back there.
Actually, I have a question.
Sure.
One is short, one didn't come.
Okay.
My father-in-law have a house, detached house, and then he tried to get permit. It's so long to get some renovation inside, and then there's a top floor and the main floor, and the main floor is got not legally another one bathroom.
Non-conforming. Yep.
And the top floor, because it's 3 room, made a 2 unit, and I also finished the basement. He has to go, or he has to go to city authority or not, but all working with the one gas company.
Oh,
panel.
So is the question, how would you convert that to a multifamily residence, like legally, or?
Yeah. So. Oh yeah, very. So it's very. So we call that after the fact permits. Like it's very possible. Again, when we're talking, and I'll just make it really brief, but we can always talk offline. From a code standpoint, when you change a home, when you add more than 2 dwelling units to a property, it's no longer considered a house from a code standpoint. It's now considered a building. Once it's considered a building, the headroom clearances change, right? So yeah, I know theoretically it changes, but now you have to comply with more stringent headroom clearances. So where, like, for example, I have a 2-unit dwelling, I need to achieve 6'5" headroom clearance in my basement, right? Underneath ducts and beams and throughout the general ceiling area. That's about to change in 2025 building code, but that's another story. With that said, if you have this existing 2-unit dwelling and it meets compliance, and you come to me and you say, hey, Ronald, I got a 2-unit dwelling. That's why that's one of the questions I ask. You want to add a 3rd unit to it. Well, now that basement height changes from 6'5" to 6'10" and 6'11", right? So you can't just physically change the height without underpinning. So what do we do then, right? So now we start looking at other ways and means of doing it. Maybe we have to recess the beam. Maybe we have to underpin the basement. Maybe we have to do some benching. And there's just a whole array of different things with regards to that. So your situation obviously is obviously nuanced. It requires a much broader, more detailed conversation around it. I'll have to look at the zoning and make sure that is allowed. You don't have any other type of restrictions and so forth. So, but it's very possible.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
25 years old.
Yeah, possible.
But if you put a 4 unit, but in fact it was a 2 unit and one finished basement.
Yeah.
And is it legal?
The legal question, the good thing with Toronto, you can actually just go and search up a building permit. They have a history of building permits on a property. You can see what was open. I think Mississauga does the same thing. You can see the history, which is great, right? So on this case here, you can look up to see if the existing units had a permit previously issued. If not, you can always call up records because you own the property. Call up records and ask them, Toronto records, tell them you would like to find, this takes about a month to get a response. So ask them you'd like to see records of previous permits issued on the property. And that will also give you a good indication. But just know that if it has a 2-unit legal or illegal, this complies to a previous zoning bylaw. So that would be as of right. Anything that you do going forward has to comply with today's zoning bylaw and today's building code, right?
So that's on the new units that you would have to be.
No, so we're changing the class of the building.
Also, it would be even in the basement.
Yeah.
Let's say the basement's already illegal. The home's already deemed as a legal duplex, but now you're changing it to a 4-plex.
Yes, yes.
So then they have to look at the basement again as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The basement,
Wow.
the basement is now rolled back in because, as I mentioned, headroom. There's just a lot that goes into it for sure. Yeah.
Amazing.
Oh. Once you go to the building, once you go to get the permits, right, and you find that you have to redo the whole thing, and the cost factor is not what you expected. So, and then you change your mind. Now, would you be on your radar?
So the question is for everyone watching virtually is, let's say you're considering, with a property you already own, if I heard you correctly, let's say we are going through the process of exploring, I'm going to convert my 2-unit legal duplex to a 3-unit. And then after going through the process, what's required as well as the costs involved, we decide to not do it. Then we back out. Would that property still be, a red flagged or in the system that someone is considering this?
Again, yeah, it'll red flag. In my experience, no, it will not be red flag. It means you applied for a permit and you canceled it. However, if anybody calls, so the city don't stop by and say why did they choose to cancel? They're not, the city do not have the resources for that, right? And they don't do that. However, if someone makes a call, the city will come out. So it doesn't red flag your property. I always hear this, by the way. No one wants to make inquiries on a property because they don't want the property to be red flagged. Well, that's kind of a misnomer. The property is never red flagged unless somebody specifically calls and say, there's an issue with that property, I need you to check it. And it can be something as simple as they haven't cut their grass, right? Then that would red flag your property. Or they would actually record an inquiry and then they have to come out, right? So yeah. So that's actually, I mean,
and I don't think that should shy away from homeowners to explore these processes to deem like red flagged in the city, especially major cities. Like they got a lot on the go right now, and we're also fulfilling something that is a necessary need of the city. They're not going to penalize somebody for doing that or exploring that option. And then the other question.
And the short question is related for everybody. 2 weeks ago, the minister, I forgot her name, showed the Ministry of Economy, say that everybody can, I don't know, over $1 million house or $2 million house without any question and stress is get over $1 million for them. You know that news?
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, so that's I think that's starting in sometime in January or something like that.
You can start the approval process in December. It's just they're allowing, especially for new construction, they're allowing the if it's going to be used as an end user, that you do not have to put 20% down. And there's just a few different financing changes that are coming in. You can start the pre-approval process actually starting now for any properties that are, I think it's after December 15th is when the
Yeah,
new
I
financing
saw
rules
that.
come into place.
Now,
And if you want, we actually wrote an article on it. I can send that over to you. Do me a favor, Jesse, Shay, Christiane, they're going to be staying around. Just go and reach out to them. Just ask for that Tyler said that I would like some of the information in regards to the new mortgage changes that are coming into effect.
And maybe while I'll say on the topic of new, there's a lot of new bylaw changes in Toronto and also throughout Ontario. And one of the things I kind of mentioned, I might as well just share it now.
Yeah.
We're really grateful for having the opportunity to join brunches here with Tyler, with Rec, and we're offering a brunch special. So not down at the local diner, but the brunch special is actually what we're going to offer is, like as I mentioned to you guys, at Property Pathways, one of the things we do for our real estate investor clients that are considering these conversion of properties, we offer a 25-point inspection that we do an in-person visit. There is a cost to that, right? But I'm waiving that cost for, and here's very specific, just because I want to make the best use of my time as well, is that what does I want to do is I want to offer a site visit and a zoning bylaw and building code review on a property that you guys have under condition, and you remove one of the conditions would need to be you're going to have your designer come in and do this inspection. I'm looking to make sure that the property can be converted, and of course you just have to forward that through Tyler, right? Once Tyler would then just let me know, okay, X person, they have a condition and they're actually moving forward with it, and then of course as an insider, right? Then of course he will just relay that information. I will schedule that time and come out to actually do that site visit. We take our job seriously. This is not something free. This is a real value here, and I take my time seriously. But I also do want anyone that's actually purchasing a property to actually know that they do that with confidence, knowing that they can achieve their end goal. So that's the brand special, my friend.
I appreciate it, Ronald. Thank you.
Yes,
And,
awesome.
we work very closely, and I think it's so important. I do appreciate that incentive to our insiders and anyone who's looking to explore with new purchases. Explore that security and that safety. That at least, worst case, what do? We back away from the deal and we'll go look at some other opportunities. But at least you have peace of mind that this is something that could be possible. Here are the potential costs involved, the timeline, so you can make the best decision for yourselves. Because Ronald and I, we're here to help investors as a whole. But if it's not right for you, the last thing we want you to do is to go and do that and incur these costs and incur these headaches. I try to eliminate in my life, as well as for all of our REC insiders and for everyone who's spoken to me. I hope I give that off, that energy, that I'm trying to overcome as many challenges and try to create as the least amount of challenges as possible for our investors.
Yeah.
And Ronald, what's the best way for everyone here as well as listening? What's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, the absolute best way is to visit Property Pathways. That's Property Pathways, PATH ways.ca. propertypathways.ca. Go to my contact form, fill it out. One of my team members will reach back out to you. We'll schedule a quick chat. We do this live zoning review. We look at the property just to make sure that the property is a good fit. And we also ask you a few questions just to make sure that you're a good fit and we understand and we can collaborate together. So propertypathways.ca. And of course, I'd ask anybody, Property Pathways, yeah. PATH ways. Pathways.
Yeah, Property Pathways.
Yeah.
And for everyone here and listening virtually, the recording or live, you need to have a service provider like Ronald in that tool belt of yours. It is critical, just like having that investor savvy team helping you do due diligence on opportunities, that mortgage broker that will help build that financing plan for you. Working with groups like Property Pathways and Ronald is critical if you're trying to maximize the use and the efficiencies of your property that you already own.
Yes.
That's the first one right there.
Okay.
Property Pathways.
It's a Ronald, right?
Yes, Ronald.
Ronald. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. You could have been anywhere, especially in November in this world, and you are with us today. We are jam-packed. you get to actually see our back offices. This is where I spend the majority of my time. And I appreciate everyone joining me today. Ronald, thank you so much. That was great, brother.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, everyone.